Hi, guys. Welcome to the podcast Digestible Technology with Dan Stoller and Mike Potter. Today we have John Waldman from Homebase on, and looking forward to diving into a quick 45-minute conversation with him. John, welcome to the show. And why don't we just start out with give us a little introduction on who you are, what Homebase does, and anything you feel like contributing at the beginning.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys, for having me. I'm excited to chat here on a podcast instead of wandering around the East Bay for a
which is
change.
which is also fun. Which is also fun.
Yeah, we should just
Yeah,
respond to us.
yeah. A little background here. My name is John. I am the founder and CEO of Homebase. Homebase provides everything you need to manage your team if you run a local business: scheduling, time tracking, payroll, hiring. We are the leading all-in-one team management platform for local businesses. We serve over 100,000 different businesses, including about 50,000, over 50,000 different restaurants. So we serve a lot of businesses as well. Hopefully, something to share from that.
Awesome. Just a quick first question here. It sounds like out of 100,000 businesses, 50,000 of them are restaurants. Where did you guys start, or where did you, kind of focus in on restaurants and small businesses, local businesses being where you wanted to solve a problem?
Yeah, well, the start of Homebase really comes back to a handful of restaurants. So the quick origin story of Homebase. So this goes back to 2013. A couple of my really good friends from growing up in Seattle. That's where I'm from originally.
206 in the house. Well,
Yeah, big lot of PNW pride on this podcast. So a couple buddies up there were opening their first restaurant. They were not from the industry. They had been doing other things, but they were really passionate about healthy eating, and they were opening their first restaurant. At the time, I had actually been working in small business products in a totally different context in the world of payments and commerce. And so I was having a lot of conversations with them around technology they were using in their businesses they were getting started, and increasingly around the team side of that, everything that they were doing to try and get their business stood up and ultimately to build and manage their team. Obviously, you guys know a ton of challenges in that. This is going back in time. They were doing everything on paper, scheduling, time tracking. They were trying to stay compliant with the myriad of labor laws. Uh, and in that, trying to be good managers, trying to recruit great people to the team, trying to keep them inspired and motivated about the culture of the business that they were building. And they're doing that all without really any help. So that was part of the inspiration. The other part of it that my sister at the time was also working in restaurants. She was working in restaurants up in Seattle, and her life as an hourly employee didn't look any different than my life looked, 10 years earlier. Even though she had a smartphone, she was using it to call in to figure out when she was working. That's what she was doing with that smartphone. She was writing her hours down in a notebook to make sure that she was getting paid correctly. And so that was really the inspiration for Homebase. It was those two sides. It was never about scheduling or any specific product. It was really about the fact that you had the totality of work really offline and so many challenges on both sides of that. If you're a worker, if you're a manager, just a lot of quality of life issues. And so that was really the starting point of Homebase. It was a belief that we could bring that work online and start to solve a lot of those challenges. And got started out building Homebase with a handful of restaurants, including my buddies up in Seattle, but also some friends here in the Bay Area. And then from there, it was kind of the full range of local businesses.
so I have two follow-up questions. Awesome story. I guess I have three. I'd love to know what that restaurant group was in Seattle. Uh,
Yes, it was Evergreens.
Okay. What a
There's a
great
local
name.
chain up there now. Yeah.
Oh, but hell yeah.
and then I guess so. The other two are so from this idea of making life better. How did you go
hmm
from that idea to actually, launching a product? And what would you say has been, I guess, the biggest challenge or learning as you've continued to evolve that and pivot from that initial kind of starting point?
Yeah, well, I guess there are two things in that. First, I had never built software before, at all. So those first couple of years were very slow going, not just in kind of figuring out what to build, but also how to build it. I think that's in the end served me quite well and come back to that. But in those early days, I was actually pretty agnostic around kind of what was the starting point. Really, what I was looking was that starting point for how do we start to bring this work online? And I thought at first maybe that was around communication. Maybe it was just around messaging. I tried a text-based service that was really kind of oriented towards the workers. They could text in a picture of their schedule and they would get back kind of updates on when they were supposed to be working, how many hours they had worked, kind of shift reminders, a lot of things like that. Things that we ultimately later built into the product in the app, but really starting with just a text-based service. I thought maybe hiring was the starting point, but ultimately kind of came back to scheduling and time tracking. And the reason why was really just because that felt like the starting point for a lot of interactions between the manager and the team. Really that schedule, building the schedule, getting it published out, getting the updates to everyone, allowing them to navigate things like shift trades, just a lot of time that was going into that on both the manager side as well as the worker side. And so that was where we started. It felt like a place that we could start to make work easier for the full team right out of the gate. And then we very quickly kind of integrated that with communication and time tracking. And that today is, what we think about as the team app. It's really the core of what the whole team is using to communicate and stay organized every day.
Awesome.
Well, I think on that one, I kind of want to double click on the workload of the managers and the workers, because the piece that seems very intriguing to me, having been on that, is when you go through the messaging, you go through the scheduling, that requires the managers to do one thing and the workers to do another for that communication to be a two-way street. How long did it take you to discover that making something where these two different roles actually bought in and communicated? How long did that take you to figure out? And then once you got buy-in from both sides, maybe at your friend's restaurant group, what are the steps you took to make it scalable or to make that buy-in happen at new customer brands? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, this on the second part. In those early days, I was really selling home base door to door. I had
Yeah.
gone and was just meeting a lot of business owners and was talking to them about the challenges in running their teams. And that's ultimately how I ended up building home base, was I just was going door to door. I probably knew every small business owner between the Bay Area residents here, between kind of San Mateo and Mountain View, because I was just walking up and down the streets talking to folks. And so when I went through that, I started to meet a handful of folks who really felt like they were willing to work with me to build something. I worked with them and kind of tested out different solutions and kind of gave them things that were in the market because I wanted to see why this stuff wasn't working
Yeah.
the way that hopefully it could have. And so that led me to kind of work with a handful of businesses to build the first version of Homebase. And that was really, we launched the beta product in 2014. So that's a while back, launched it publicly in 2015. But it was a very, very hands-on kind of testing period because there's a lot of product here.
Yeah.
We're trying to build all these tools for the managers, building apps for the team so that they could manage their schedule, request time off, track their availability. There's a lot to it that we really wanted to launch with. And we were just pretty methodical and working through with those businesses through those requests and making sure that we could deliver on that core promise, which frankly, Mike, you nailed, which was time savings. We really wanted that first version of Homebase to deliver a lot of time savings. And for managers, pretty quickly we were saving people 5 hours plus a week of just the day-to-day administrative parts of managing an hourly team, the schedule building and publishing and navigating the trades and time tracking, preparing payroll. We could save people a lot of time. And we gave it away for free. That's the other big part here. We didn't charge anything for the first 3 years, I want to say. It was a freemium product, but really it was just free at that point.
Yeah.
We hadn't built the emium part of the product yet. And so we were just giving it away for free, trying to make life easier for these businesses, bring the teams online. And that really was the key to success. From that, once we had those first couple of businesses that were really saving time, they started to tell people they knew about it. And, really the word of mouth started happening pretty fast.
So you've been around, so 2013. So you're 10 years in, right? When's your official 10-year anniversary?
It's sort of fuzzy. I don't know. I tried to resist it because even that first year didn't really feel like Homebase at that point. I feel in my mind it kind of became Homebase in 2014 when we launched the beta version of the product. And I still remember that first weekend when the first couple of businesses that I had never met before signed up for Homebase. Like that's when it became that's when it felt like a real thing. But even then it was kind of a slow going out of the gate.
But I mean, clearly now, I guess 9 years later, you're managing 100,000 businesses. And I have a follow up. Is that individual entities? So that represents every location, or is that individual kind of restaurant? So like one business could represent multiple locations.
Yeah, the full location count is quite a bit bigger than that, but it's over 100,000 different companies.
Wow.
That's awesome. So obviously you had that weekend where someone you'd never met signs up for this.
Yeah.
This on
I was sitting in the parking lot of a Safeway and I was refreshing my phone like every hour. And I remember seeing, I was logged into our admin dashboard and I remember seeing the business sign up and I was so excited.
That's amazing. So when did you start to see that traction kind of continue to the point you are today? I mean, was it just a steady, like perfect diagonal growth chart up, and like did you hit a hockey stick?
Yeah, up until about March 2020.
What happened then?
We could come back to that, but yeah, it was really it was a pretty just consistent growth path. And in those early days, it was a lot of word of mouth and kind of organic growth happening. We were doing some things that I hope were making work easier for a lot of people, and they were talking about it. And it just kind of grew consistently. In those early days, it started really in the Bay Area and up in Seattle. I also did kind of a day trip to Portland and was selling it door to door up there to kind of like try and seed that a little bit. And then pretty soon, we could just see it taking off in other places once the website was up and there were other ways for people to find us. But it was actually fairly consistent in that period, or that whole period.
That's amazing. Mike, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, well, I want to know if you remember when you were sitting in your car in 2014, what version of what brand of phone were you refreshing every hour?
Oh man, it was definitely. Well, I had two phones at that time because I was testing out software and I was doing
Yeah.
different things. So I had an early version of whichever iPhone version that would have been,
I'm
and I
trying to
also had
remember too. I can't remember. You think,
an early Samsung Note. Also, I was a big Samsung Note user.
and
That's the big one, right? Like you couldn't
Yeah,
forget
I had the big screen. I felt like a power user. I could.
tablet.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering when that stopped. Everything was getting bigger and bigger and bigger when you couldn't really tell the difference between an iPad and a phone at one point. Like if you look at your old, iPhone 4S or something, you're like, oh, I feel like Shaquille O'Neal holding a Corona bottle.
Yeah, yeah. My,
Now,
my current iPhone is probably the same size as that early Note that felt like such a big device at the time.
John, the other question I have is, what I'd love to hear the feelings about just the feelings you felt as you gained momentum, right? Like the things that went into putting all this initial work in, going door to door, trying to go out and solve this problem for buddies, essentially. What were the feeling what did you feel as a founder when people did sign on without you going and knocking on
Yeah.
their door? And then what feelings came immediately after that as it did continue to scale and grow? What are the founder thoughts or self-consciousnesses that might not even be a word, but what are the things that you then start to realize, oh, I have to start prioritizing this or making sure that this can keep growing in a certain way? Is that something you remember? And if you'd like to share any of that, I think that's powerful stuff for anybody who's going through bringing a product to market, and this is their idea and their passion, especially after giving it away for 3 years for free, right? You got to start making it commercial. And that's like, I got chills just thinking about you're sitting in your car refreshing your phone. People joined. Great. Now what?
Yeah, well, I think when you ask the question of, hey, was it just growing consistently? It's easy to kind of look back from here, and it feels like, oh, that must have been like an easy, consistent journey.
Perfect out of the
But
box.
honestly, the memories of those times was like more about no's and failure than it was about like, oh, we're compounding success and we're building a great company here.
Yeah.
And I think whether you're building a software company, whether you're building a restaurant, whether you're building a local business of any kind, it's hard. It is so hard. Those first few years to me feel what I remember more viscerally. I remember those really big success points because they stand out against the things that I remember most, which was like no's everywhere. As I'm selling Homebase door to door, there's a hell of a lot more no's than there were yeses in that. Trying to raise money and it was just no's across the board until it wasn't. Trying to hire people to come work on Homebase, so many no's in those early days. I tried to find a technical co-founder, couldn't, no's across the board there. There were lots of challenges in those early years. And then being so, never having built software before, I think just running into a lot of walls that you run into building any product, which is things don't work quite the way that you expected. There's bugs, there's issues. So honestly, like I remember a lot of that stuff just as viscerally as I remember those moments of success. And that's probably why those moments of success stand out so much, is because at the time, those were far rare. And so, yeah, I remember that. I remember the first, the first moment when we kind of like got somebody that signed up outside of the state. I remember those first days when like we crossed 1,000 businesses.
Yeah.
At that point, we felt like, oh, we're unstoppable. It felt. I look back, I was like, oh, it was pretty small number at the end of in reality, but felt like we were unstoppable at that point. I remember some of those big wins. I remember that the when I raised the first round of money, of like what a huge accomplishment that felt like when I kind of
Right.
stopped paying out of my own pocket for this stuff to build Homebase. So yeah, I remember a lot of those. There's so many kind of more visceral emotions from those first couple of years. Those memories are so salient to this day because just the ups and downs were so high and low. Uh, I'd like to say that was like the first 2 years, but that was like the first 9 years, really.
Like,
Still
I
going.
felt that way yesterday, actually.
Yeah.
How easy it was yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for a lot of folks that don't come from the tech space, and obviously we hope that this podcast goes to both folks in technology and food, local business, small business, etc. Maybe they don't really understand, how oftentimes tech startups come about, be it from, to your point of trying to find a technical co-founder, trying to find capital, building a customer base so that you could then go raise additional capital. Clearly, we don't need to go into like a whole, diatribe on it, but if you could just give us a quick kind of synopsis of, how you originally thought you were going to start the company with venture capital and kind of what you ended up having to do, and when those moments were that you got maybe more into that sort of VC track that I think most software companies these days intentionally follow. Whether or not it's right for their business is a different conversation, but I think there's a pretty tried and true playbook. So if you could just walk through that, you know,
Yeah. I mean, I think in those early days, and particularly being in the Bay Area, you read TechCrunch or other publications like that, and it's the same thing. Like you see the success stories, and you look at that, and you kind of imagine a certain path. And so what I imagined at the time was, oh, I'm going to go raise a seed round and hire a handful of engineers, and I'll be off to the races, and I'll be able to hire, or I'll be able to raise that seed round because this idea is incredible. And I'm going to be so compelling in the way that I present this idea. And the opportunity is so gigantic, and there's so many ways to help local businesses and their teams. People will obviously get that and want to support it. And that was not at all what it was. Not at all. The first investor conversation that I remember the most was a very prominent investor. I will not name them, but a very prominent investor who, in the very early days of what became Homebase, directly told me that this was one of the stupidest ideas he's ever heard. That's what it felt like in the early days of trying to raise money for this. And there was part of it that I understand, which is I was being looked at by investors as somebody who wanted to build software, and I didn't have a technical co-founder, and I had never built software before. So yeah, real risk. I get that. And in hindsight, I can appreciate that more. That was not what this specific investor was responding to, which was me saying, I want to build a company to serve small businesses. I don't care about serving enterprise companies. I don't care about making life easier for managers at the Fortune 500 companies. This is about making life easier for 2 million plus small business owners and 25 million workers. That's what I was inspired by. So one, they didn't like selling to small businesses. Two, they're like, this is HR. Nobody will pay for HR. And what I was trying to convince them was like, this isn't, yes, it's like ostensibly HR, but that's not really what it is. This is about how the team runs. This is about the operations of the business. This is about the work experience. This is about things that are far more profound than just like what you think about as HR. But I had a hard time convincing people in those days that's what it was about. I had a hard time convincing people that I could build something, that I could find the way to bring small business teams online, that they would use what I was building, that this was really going to have the impact that I was saying it was. And I got so many no's in those early days. So I didn't get to raise the seed round and then immediately start hiring people and just kind of get going. Instead, I kind of bootstrapped it for a period of time. I hired a few engineers and was kind of working on a project basis. And I got so lucky because I hired great people. Even at that point, I just got lucky. And got to work with them for a period of time. Then I, did the friends and family thing. I got some friends mostly to give me some money to continue what I was building along the way, and then ultimately did end up raising the first round of venture funding in 2014. That was like a true seed round, but at that point, we were probably already live in 1,000 businesses at that point, or had like 1,000 businesses sign up. And so I think at that point there was like real evidence of, okay, I have built something that is actually having an impact here. Mm-hmm. People are finding it, and there is a need in small businesses. And at that point, it became a bit more of a traditional venture-backed path.
And since then, how many rounds have y'all raised?
I mean, our last round was our Series C. We've raised over 100 million at this point.
Congrats, John.
Yeah,
that's huge.
Yeah, I say that I recognize it's a lot of money, and I feel very fortunate in that. I feel very fortunate to have the incredible investors I do that are such big believers in what we are building here, and the believers in the impact that we can have here in the world.
What if I just ask what would, maybe just two quick things. One, knowing what you know now, what would you go back and have told yourself in 2013 on any front? What are the things that pop right into your head as things you'd say, look out for this and do this? And then the other question I have is, what's the difference between convincing someone to give you $100 million and convincing a friend, whether it was money they gave you or to test their restaurant and buy in with their time and their effort. What's the difference between talking to a restaurant owner versus a VC that's just there to fund you?
Yeah, I guess that's a fascinating question. You know, I think I'm not a good salesperson. I don't think I am. But I got a great piece of advice early on around fundraising that I think is actually pretty been true about both at some level. And that piece of advice was that it's not my job to convince people, it's my job to find the people who are already convinced. And that really resonated for me with the kind of the incredible investors that we had. Like if you look back at all of the investors that we have at Homebase, they were not coming in uninformed about the problems that we were trying to solve. They had very kind of firsthand, visceral experience of the challenges of hourly work. Whether that was because they had managed them at different points in their life, whether that was because they had grown up in local businesses, had a retail or a restaurant job growing up. These were people who connected to the problem and realized it wasn't just HR for small businesses. You know, that this was something far more impactful. So I think that has been true on the investor front for sure. I think that's also been true on a lot of in the early customers too. You know, I met a lot of small businesses. I met a lot of restaurants in those early days. Everybody had pain points here. You know, I could walk into any business, ask them, what's your biggest headache? And almost always it was something team related. There's a big jump between that of the people who are like, yeah, if you bring me something, like I would use it. And like this pain point is so acute for me that I want to help you build it. And that's really what every early customer is kind of signing up to do. They know that it's not going to be perfect. They know that you're going to be working out the bugs and it's not going to deliver on every feature. But over the course of a couple of years, it'll get there and it'll get better and better. And so it's the same thing of kind of those incredible businesses who kind of took a chance on me and on Homebase to build something that was going to be quite different than anything else in the market in order to kind of solve their most acute pain points around their team. And so I think there was some similarity in that regard.
When you think about it now, do you feel like you could sell to any one of your customers? Like, could you walk blind into a restaurant right now that wasn't using an automated team management platform and get them on Homebase?
Oh, I'd like to think if they weren't using anything, I could. You know, because right out of the gate, if you're using the free version of Homebase, like I can pretty much guarantee you're going to save 5 hours a week of time. That's for free. You know, from there, we're going to help you stay more compliant. We're going to help your team stay longer. We're going to help you find people. And we can save you a lot more time than that if you're using more of Homebase. So I would sure hope that yeah, I could I could get you off of paper or Excel or whatever you're using.
So you alluded to, COVID, and I think some days I want to have the privileged belief that it never happened, though obviously it did, and it affected all of us in a variety of ways. Restaurants and small retail businesses obviously got affected drastically. Do you want to talk about, what your March of 2020 looked like, and then what it feels like in June of 23? I guess all over 3 years later now.
Yeah, I mean, what a hard few years, and hard times for us as a company, but not even comparable to what local businesses and our customers have gone through over the last few years. And in part, that's what made 2020 so hard was, one of the things that I enjoy most about Homebase is getting to know a lot of really incredible business owners, restaurant
Right.
owners, getting to know folks like Danny along the way, where Homebase was the catalyst, the reason why we first met. But then you develop a good relationship, and I find a lot of inspiration in Danny and in a lot of our customers. And talking to them in 2020, it was just an impossibly hard time for for our customers, for people that I cared a lot about. So I'll go back in time. We were in kind of a unique position because we served so many teams and had so much data. And so I think we kind of saw some of what was going on earlier than others did. Um, because what we could see is, you remember in those early days, there were COVID lockdowns in a couple of places, there were COVID cases in just a couple of places. But I remember in early March when we started to see the signals that, fewer people were working and businesses were closing all over the country. We could see people closing in Atlanta. There were no COVID cases in Atlanta, and yet we could see that businesses were closing down. We could see that people were not showing up to work in Atlanta. And that was a big red alarm pretty early on. We've seen the impacts of a lot of natural disasters. You see a hurricane hit Houston, Harvey and things like that. And you can kind of see it show up in the data. So we kind of knew what it looked like. And before you knew it, I mean, it just looked like a natural disaster was happening everywhere in the country.
Yeah.
And then it was just accelerating. Over the course of a month, I think in the middle of April, over 65% of our customers were closed. I mean, it was just like a profound impact on local businesses, just so extreme. And that was like the quantitative piece of it that we were trying to get out to the world and kind of raise the alarm bells with politicians and with journalists and things like that, of like, hey, we've got a health emergency, but also we've got like an economic emergency here, and just trying to sound the alarm bells. That was not fun. But I think the harder part was, talking to the folks that I knew. My brother-in-law owns and runs restaurants. Like I got lots of friends who own and run restaurants and local businesses of any time, of different types. He's talking to customers and just, the panic, uncertainty, chaos, depression, anxiety, so many emotions that folks were going through in that period of time. The extreme challenge of, having to furlough or lay off people that you had hired and gotten to know so well as people. We did that as a company. It was brutally hard, but we were talking to hundreds of thousands of people every day that were doing the same thing in their businesses. I mean, it was just a extremely depressing time. The the silver lining in that, to the extent that there was one, was I think it was also very mission reaffirming for us as a company. That was the thing that we could find purpose in April of 2020 was, okay, there's, thousands of businesses across the country, tens, millions of businesses that are really struggling right now. What can we do to make this easier for them? And so that really became the rallying cry. We kind of threw everything that we had been doing out the window. We kind of threw our roadmap out the window, and it was just, half a year of what can we do to help? And that was everything from helping employees get unemployment aid. It was helping people do furloughs, providing consulting free for free through that period. It was providing health and safety tools. There's just a bunch of stuff that we did to try and help in that period of time.
And I think it was appreciated. And obviously, 2020, terrible year for restaurants. 21, great year for restaurants in a lot of ways. And I'm sure all those customers to whom you extended the helping hand, repaid it with loyalty and thanks. How was it as a leader? Obviously it's heart-wrenching to let go of even one person, let alone furlough or lay off entire, divisions. How did you handle it? I mean, I also assume that at some point you had to stop going to the office. So you went from this
Yeah,
group of like-minded folks around you to, I assume, I don't know when exactly you guys moved to Lafayette, but I know it happened partially as a result of
it's 2021. Yeah,
you went
yeah.
from cool San Francisco apartment dwellers to big house, but maybe not as much surrounding. How is that? What did that feel like? Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I mean, we were so in part because we could see it coming and were expecting the worst. We really did. I mean, we did a big layoff ourselves. We cut 40% of the company on April 1st, 2020. brutally hard. Had all these incredible people at Homebase who we had built the company with through, really hard years, those early years of a company, to try and build something in service of Main Street teams. And people were so oriented to that mission, and really just in a pretty incredible group of people. And had to say goodbye to 40% of them. And there was no solace in that moment of like, well, it's outside of our hands. This is the world bringing this to it. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Still have to get in front of everybody, tell them they're doing it. You still have to call everybody and have the one-on-one Zooms to break the news. That was not a fun day. That was not a fun period. So that was pretty hard period. Kind of rallied the team around then kind of a little bit of the Go For It team. But, I think we kind of got through that period of helping local businesses through that period of change. I think for me, it was that I too was finding purpose in trying to help. I felt very, very fortunate. I was sitting in my one bedroom apartment in San Francisco, and I couldn't leave it either. And I was going stir crazy like everybody else, locked up. And my wife and I were working in there, and we felt fortunate. We were in the very, very fortunate position of we didn't have any kids. We had a little extra space. We both had desks. In the grand scheme of things, we were very, very fortunate in our working situation that we had. But we're still in a one bedroom apartment, like locked in there, going a little bit crazy. But the thing that I had, which I felt very fortunate, was like, well, at least I have a purpose right now, and talking to other folks that were like, I'm sitting at home, like this is boring. I'm going stir crazy. I'm kind of, questioning lots of different things. I didn't have that. I was just like heads down grinding. And it was, working crazy hours and not sleeping. But also it felt like it was in service of something pretty important, which is how are we going to help, million plus people through a really hard time. And so that was particularly motivating. And then you try and kind of translate that into the company too, help everybody else feel that sense of purpose, because everybody's sitting at home kind of dealing with a lot of the same shit at that point.
John, what did you feel like? I mean, so I had two questions thinking about this. Who do you think from the technology side did the giving back, like it sounds like you guys you especially, these were your friends. You made close relationships with people. You had a very close tie and were open to hearing and listening, not just, hey, can we give you a couple months off the platform, or hey, can we just take a break? Like there doesn't seem to be any selfishness or real concern for Homebase. I'm sure there was, but the bigger concern was what can we give to this industry and our customers who are our friends? And I want to know, what did you learn from that has helped you since in 2023? Like helped you reform coming out of COVID? What were the learnings that you took being open to helping these customers through this period? And who else did it really well that you saw?
Yeah, I don't think we were alone. I mean, anybody who was serving local businesses and truly
Everyone who survived.
Truly committed to serving local businesses, face this gut punch. And I thought there were a lot of technology companies that did a great job of kind of rallying and providing support in different ways. But I think for us and for a lot of those companies, what it was a real test to what are you about as a company? And I never really thought of us as a product company. Back to the start, I was pretty agnostic about the product that we started with. I always thought about us as like, we're really a pretty customer first company. Our mission is about the type of teams that we serve, local businesses, hourly workers, the very challenging work that they do, and making that easier. And I think because of that, it allowed us, it was mission reaffirming. Obviously, there were companies who made different decisions than us. There were companies that said, we're going up market, we're going to other industries, we're going to go serve other verticals that are booming right now. We did not do that. We were very much of like, we're gonna help local businesses through this period of time, and we're gonna be there to serve them when we're on the other side of this. And we're gonna double down on who we are as a company and the customer that we serve. And I think that that was there was never any doubt, but yet, when it gets kind of tested in that way, it becomes like even stronger, right? And so I think that's carried through for us now. Now that as we think about what we're doing and we think about what we're building and kind of the company we want to build over the next 10 years, it's still all about local businesses. It is still all about local business teams. And I think for the handful of other companies, technology companies that are really dedicated to serving small businesses, local businesses, I think a lot of them did a lot of great stuff too.
Well, I think that's a great segue. So, what do the next 10 years look like? You've alluded to 10 years, so I assume that means there's no IPO planned. I don't know, are we violating the SEC, any SEC regs by asking that question? But what's next for you and Homebase?
Yeah, I'm fast forward, obviously, we're here in 2023. We survived the worst of 2020. We're helping a lot more businesses, and um, hopefully a few years from now we don't have to talk about COVID as much as we have been, but I still find inspiration in talking to and folks like you, Danny, on the journey through it. So, but we're heading into a different stage here. I think a different stage of local businesses and a different stage of Homebase. And honestly, I am as excited about Homebase as I have ever been here, 10-ish years into it. Because I think everything that we have done as a company has really been about setting the stage for where we go from here. And without sharing too much on that, we'll have some cool stuff coming out soon for sure. I think about that first 10 years was really about us making sure that we could provide everything you needed to manage your team in one place. And that took a long time, to get the scheduling and time tracking and HR and payroll and, some of the financial services tools for workers. We spent a lot of time putting all of these building blocks in place. Over the next stage of the company, I think we get to now kind of level that up into some more magical experiences for business owners and for workers. And obviously we can't sit here in June of 2023 and not talk about kind of the potential for AI in there and some of the other technology shifts. But truly, I think the ability for technology to profoundly improve the work experience is going to be even greater over the next 10 years. And I think that's going to be really important because I think local businesses are going through a different stage here too. They got to compete against big companies in a new way. They got to compete for workers in a new way. So it's only more important that we kind of give technology to help make that easier.
Yeah, I think one challenge I think that faces a lot of specifically small businesses is there are quite a few products that solve X need, but not all of the needs. And speaking from experience, I think we had like 27 SaaS products at one
Yeah.
point with my guys, and Carl Orsborn published an article a couple weeks ago about average is like 15 to 22. So we weren't that far off. What I think makes it difficult specifically for the owner operator or the group that has maybe two or three support team members is how to administer that technology. So Homebase, for example, if you just use the sort of off the shelf scheduling product, it's a pretty quick onboarding, right? It's like point and click, and you can import your people from the point of sale. It walks you through it. It's a very simple and easy to use product, and I think, but once you get 20 of those and you need them all to interact, that's when it gets hard. So one thing I'm optimistic for is, I guess, the next level of integration. And maybe it's not that the technologies themselves integrate, but maybe we're able to stand up a new version of an API or something that makes an API less necessary, to where you can be in one place and get the benefits of all these different technological solutions. Because no one's gonna solve every single problem. No one's gonna hit 125 nails with one hammer. And if they
Yeah,
do, God, that hammer sounds
it's not a
terrifying.
great hammer.
Uh,
Yeah,
yeah, it's more of like I don't know what it is, some kind of press. But what are your thoughts on that? And like how do we as operators, as technologists, as business leaders continue to look at this sort of very fractured and scattered marketplace, specifically in
yeah,
small business? Because I think once you get to enterprise or even like mid market, there's plenty of support. You can do some level of custom solutions, but if you have one store, I mean, you are at the whims of the market at that point.
yeah. I mean, honestly, what I remember you told me that you had 27 pieces of software blew my mind. And I think I have repeated that stat many, many times since you told me,
Right.
because it truly has, I think, paints the picture for what a world we're living in here. You know, when we started Homebase, our average customer had like four or five, right? They had QuickBooks, they had their point of sale, they had a website, and they probably had like a Facebook account. You know, it was like such a limited set of technology that people were using. Now they've got five pieces just for online ordering. You know, it's just like an astounding amount of technology that the average business uh, has to deal with. And yeah, I mean, I think that's like radically unsustainable. Nobody has time for that. Nobody has time to manage that. If this is software that you need other people using, you tell me you're gonna spend your time administering 10 different logins and accounts and doing password resets and shit like that for across all of this software. That is crazy. Nobody has time for that. So I think that it is incumbent uh, on all kind of technology companies to probably do a little bit more and kind of help people realize some of the benefits of, I hate to say consolidation, but kind of like consolidation around a handful of solution sets, because some of these things will be better if they are in the same place. And then also incumbent on every technology company to play really nicely
Mm.
with the other tools in the world of small business. Because yeah, you can't penalize a restaurant for wanting to use a different payroll provider. Uh, you got to make their lives easier in every part of their business. They got way too much going on in order to deal with anything that feels or smells like IT support. So,
Yeah.
it's kind of incumbent on us as technology providers to make that happen.
Yeah, I mean that's agreed, and I think it's a refreshing look at it. Um, yeah, it really is. It's quite daunting, and I think an anecdote that comes to mind. So we're setting up this podcast, and as much as I am love to be the sort of like strategy and vision person, I'm also the guy that loves to just figure things out. I love problem solving. So we're gonna launch this podcast, and so I do my sort of standard deep dive on like what's the best tech stack for a podcast, because you have to record it, you have to edit it, you have to host it and publish it. You probably want to do some social media marketing, so you need a relatively easy way to get these like 30-second snippets that hopefully are going to blow up someone's dopamine
Yeah.
receptor. Think you're smart enough to click to, and there's all these sort of processes that go into that, and there's still not like a one-click solution. Like there is no sort of like host a podcast at the top level, just pay $120 a month and we'll do all of it for you. That doesn't exist. So I'm in a very similar place where so we're trying Riverside right now, which you're recording on. We use Google Hangouts record last week, but the collaboration tools are terrible. So if whoever the host is, they own this 5 gigabyte video, and then you have to figure out how to transfer it to your co-host. Riverside exports to Spotify, but it doesn't export to Adobe Rush. So it's I find it fascinating that even in this day and age of like massive and rapid proliferation of technology across verticals and horizontals, still none of them are actually that sort of like one size fits all, and oftentimes they don't even have the integration to where you find yourself in this position of like, well, my process is downloading it into Google Drive, which I have set up as a streaming software on my computer. So I don't know, I think it's really interesting, and I hope that over the next 10, 15, 20 years, we'll see the ability of technology companies to scale that compatibility faster. So when something comes off the shelf, it's not necessarily just an MVP. It's maybe what used to be like a Series A or B or C product is ready to go because with AI helping coders move faster, that I think that would be a
Yeah,
great.
I mean, I think it's got to be because no one's got the patience for that anymore. You know, the expectations of software go up every year, and that's a hard thing as a software company, but also a great thing as a consumer of software. You know, we should demand more from our solutions every year.
I know I keep emailing Clippy from Microsoft Word, but they don't. It's just I just get auto responder. Remember Clippy, Mike? The
Oh, of
little.
course. No, I talk about Clippy almost on every conversation I have because you have that like literally you have that because one of the things in a platform that I've worked on is you need to hit save or else everything you may have just worked on will disappear. And trust
Yeah,
me, that is Clippy in my right. You
it's
remember
funny.
having your whole thing typed out and Clippy comes up. Sure, you don't want to save it? You're like, nah, Clippy, get out of here. And then the power goes out, and you're like. Yeah, I mean, it's just
I wish
Braveheart.
Clippy. Yeah.
No, like brutal.
Well, we're coming up on time. I guess, Mike, I want to give you a chance to ask John any last questions.
There's one last question. This is just because I really like what you had to say just now, John. And I've been actually working a lot with my customers to do this, which is take responsibility and get a thank you at the end of the day to have all these systems that they are paying for actually work so they don't. For instance, we're a communications marketing platform. And there's a lot of ones out there, OpenTable, Pop Menu. A lot of these have very similar capabilities to message guests based on behavior. But if you're using all of these as a restaurant, the biggest thing I've heard from a lot of our customers is, well, I don't want to turn any of them on because by turning them on, I might scare away one. Now, now because of over engagement, right? Leave us a review 20 times in their email inbox, or do this or do that, or don't. And I'm sure there's a lot of this going on with either the food safety tech or the HR and the scheduling technologies. And I just got to this point where I'm like, give me your rep at that company. Like, let us go and figure out, like, you tell us the customer journey you want, and we'll go figure out how to make these triggers replicate that. So we're not duplicating, but enhancing. And that's gotten some crazy, crazy positive thank yous and responses from both technology founders that are at these companies, like, well, we have never looked at it like that before. And then also from the restaurants who are like, that's all I needed was for somebody to go take that on. So my question was, how did we end up, how do you feel like we've ended up here? Because you seem like you very much relate to that idea. How did we
Yeah.
get to a place, right, where we're not there yet? And what are the changes we make having survived COVID as from the technology front to the betterment of the customers that we serve and care about and want thank yous from? Like, what is the easy solution that you see that we should have been doing 10 years ago, but we do have the opportunity to do today?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we were going through a pretty unique period in technology history the last 7 years too. Just
Yeah.
the amount of funding that was going into build software is part of the reason that we're in this situation today. Is that there was a lot of proliferations of different solutions and people kind of finding narrower and narrower places to kind of build for.
Yeah.
I think over the next, that's probably changing, but over the next 10 years, we're just in a different place in the technology investment cycle. 10 years ago, there was such little technology in the world of restaurants and small businesses. If we go back in time and sitting here in 2013, and you could have told me that Danny would be using 27 different pieces of technology, I'd be kind of saying, hallelujah, that's amazing. That's amazing that that much technology has come in to support local businesses. Because at that point in time, it was not obvious that anybody was going to build technology
I
for
know for a
small
fact they weren't
businesses.
using guest Wi-Fi and they barely had email marketing. I know for that for a fact.
Yeah, I mean, like early version of Homebase, it was like we got to like try to make this work in offline mode because Wi-Fi was going down all the time. Just like getting people to clock in and out on a tablet was so hard because Wi-Fi would go out all the time.
Right.
So if we were sitting here and saying of like, you know what, the problem we're going to be at in 10 years is there's going to be too much technology. I would say we should be so lucky. We should be so lucky that that much investment has gone in to help local businesses, to help workers in a different way, to help small businesses thrive. And while it can be frustrating and it doesn't make the current set of challenges any easier to navigate, the reality is of like, wow, what an incredible position. And I think about that. I think that now, the next 10 years, from where we are now for the next 10 years, I think that local businesses are going to have better access to technology than the large companies. I think that was kind of the promise of the last 10 years, but now I think that we're going to hit that period of time where it's definitely true. And yeah, it's gonna put pressure on us to integrate our software together, and it's gonna put pressure on us to streamline some of the things we do. But wow, what an incredible opportunity for local businesses to embrace technology. What an incredible opportunity for people to not be working all of the time on their businesses, to be able to leverage some of this for actual impact in their lives. Uh, it's going to be amazing. So I'm very optimistic about it, as optimistic as ever.
Thanks, John.
Great response. Super excited to see what the future holds. John, thanks so much for coming on. I know you got to get out of here pretty quick, but thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and we'll let you know when we get this thing live. All right.
Awesome. Always fun to chat. Thank you guys for having me as an official guest here. I'm honored.
We're honored.
We're honored. Thank you, man.
All right, guys. See ya.
See ya. That was good.
Felt good.
It felt like we had a better flow on that one. I liked a lot of your questions, so that was awesome.
Well, and also I just like what was interesting, Danny, is now I feel like all the questions I had that I knew, like, okay, now's the time to pass it off, you were asking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's, if we continue to co-host, that's the goal, right? Is to get
Totally.
that sort of, let me do a quick, fake intro.
Yeah.
Today's guest, John Waldman, is the CEO and founder of Homebase, a software that hopes to make life for small business owners easier, focusing on team management, HR. I think they started with scheduling, but they've expanded to much more since then. Today's episode, we'll talk about how he scaled to $100 million in investment, how they have over 100,000 businesses on the platform, 50,000 of them, which are restaurants, and our hope for the future of a technology ecosystem that's a little bit easier to use. This is Digestible Technology with Mike and Danny. Sweet. Cool. I'm gonna stop recording.